Hey YouTube, Louie here. Well, I finally did it. I finally sold my house, and I'm going to do a little instructional video here about what not to do when you're trying to sell your house. It took me about 3.5 months to get my house sold, and this was in the period of time where everybody said that real estate is on fire and houses were selling in 2 days. But that was not my experience, and I just want to tell you what I did wrong. Perhaps this will help you someday, because I was really surprised. First, to start off, I'm on the West Coast, and property values are high here. I'm not going to go into how much, but it was a high-end property. It wasn't just your typical property. So enough said about that. But the same thing I think applies in your market as well. Things to do and not to do. First off, in regard to the health of the real estate market, I have been watching the alternate news carefully, which I do, and seeing the stories that the general cable news does not bring us. And I'm really highly concerned about high-end real estate. I'm equally concerned about the potential changes to the tax code, which potentially will be removing deductibility of property taxes, and maybe someday even the mortgage interest deduction. It's pretty clear to me that the new generation, or the newer generations, don't really care as much about property and don't care as much about high-end properties as the older generations did. On top of that, we've got the baby boomers coming of age, and we have a curtailing of foreign investment. Especially in the really high-end properties, I have noticed recently the stories about China cracking down on the expatriation of money into the U.S. real estate market, and definitely they are a lot of the sales of high-end real estate, not only in the United States but Canada and other places, are speculative properties. And I totally understand that. If you're living in China, where they are placing restrictions on your ability to invest, you may not be able to get your money out of the market. Of course, the money is fleeing China as fast as possible, and one of the destinations is high-end real estate. I think a lot of these properties are turning into rentals or perhaps even sitting vacant. But China is cracking down on that. That is one of the stories that I've heard. They are basically restricting foreign investment. And I have just also noticed that the economy is not as strong as people say it is. I think there was a great deal of euphoria around President Trump, and the things that were going to transpire quickly when he became president. And right now, I think there is a great deal of doubt that virtually anything that he said is going to transpire, with the exception of possibly military and police action. And we also have bonds threatening to go higher, but I don't think they will. But in any event, I really am fearful that the high-end real estate market is going to take a double dip. Now, I bought my home about 12 years ago at the height, before the real estate crash of 2008, and rode the property down all the way to 50% of the purchase price. Well, maybe it was 60. All right, that was at the bottom of the bottom. At that point in time, everybody was giving their houses back to the banks, and the banks were sitting on them. Sometimes they were selling them as REOs. But anyway, the majority of my particular high-end neighborhood turned over. People lost everything in those investments. My wife and I chose to hang on because we really couldn't did not choose to give our house away. It just didn't make sense to us. And also being old enough to realize that there are 10-year cycles, and there have been 10-year cycles as long as I can remember. Anything that you experience, in my opinion, can reverse itself given 10 years. And that turned out to be almost exactly to the day correct in this case. The market has recovered, and my home has recovered all of its value. At the same time, I'm older, and I do not choose to ride it down for the second time, because we'll lose our equity really quickly if the house declines by 40-50% again. And so I could be dead wrong, and maybe the market is headed to new highs, but the affordability has it's really not affordable. It's not the mortgage, just the mortgage. It's also the taxes, the Mello-Roos, the utilities, the HOA fees, the maintenance. The bigger the house you have, the bigger the headache you have, and when you start fixing things, you multiply those expenses every time your house gets 1,000 square feet bigger. So that is why I decided to sell. My wife and I are going to downsize and move into our final house, preferably a one-story on a nice sized lot, maybe near a lake, and just get ready for retirement, which for me won't happen for about 5 years. But we are in the process of doing that. And so what did I think? Well, I really thought, being the cheap bastard that I am, that the only thing that mattered was to get my home in the MLS. Because we had homes, selling in the neighborhood, and we priced ours, competitive to those, maybe a tad high. We don't have a lot of upgrades, but we do have a nice pool. And I picked this real estate agent out of the off of a flyer that was sent to me, and his gig was the low-cost real estate agent. He said that he would sell my home for 1%. Now, what that means is there is a buyer and a seller side, and the buyer, you need to pay 2 to 3% to get a buyer's agent interested in selling your property. So naturally, you have to pay the buyer 2 to 3%. We chose to pay the buyer side 2.5%, but the selling agent would work for only 1%. And he didn't do open houses. He didn't do a lot of consultation. Matter of fact, he subcontracted everything from the photographs to the showings. There was no open house. And he said, basically, once you get your house in the MLS, that's all you need to do. You put it in the MLS, it'll go to all the sources, Realtor, Zillow, Redfin, etc. Your house will be on the MLS, and buyers who see it will want to take a look at it. So that made a lot of sense to me. The MLS is the major selling engine, and why would I pay more than 1%? In my case, every percent was a lot of money. So I went this route. We fixed up, we got our house presentable, etc. We listed it with him. Well, the very first thing that happened after we listed with him, and it was all true, it was a 1% deal, and it was cancelable at any time, so that gave me some security. So the sign went up. Well, what did the sign say? It said, I'm not going to give you his name, but basically it said, Joe Blow, the 1% real estate agent. List your home for 1%. This is what the sign on my property said. And my wife and I looked at each other and said, oh no, I think we've made a terrible mistake. Because what that sign said to everybody else is, something's not normal here. But nonetheless, I had committed to do it, so he put it on the MLS. The sign was up there. It told everybody that our house was for sale, but we were cheap, I guess is what it said, and we had it pretty fully priced. Well, the next 60 days went by, and we had a total of 3 showings. 3, all right, and there were not that many houses for sale during this time, and the market had settled back a little bit, and interest rates were a little bit higher, but nonetheless, nobody was seeing our house. And as this happened, we lost the summer. So my wife and I looked at each other and said, you know what, we really messed up. Something is terribly wrong with this situation. It's not that people don't like our house, people are not even looking at our house. They were not coming for showings. So we said, you know what, this just isn't working. And we fired that real estate agent, the 1% real estate agent. Of course, he said it was our fault, and we had priced it too high, and he wanted a price reduction, etc., etc. But this was way too important to us to take a chance. Well, okay, so we reached out to a real estate agent that we bought a house from 10, 15 years ago, about 15 years ago, and he's quite successful now. And we asked him for his help. He came over and he did a walk through the property. And the very first thing he said about the property was that we had blocked our views. I had planted a bunch of trees, and the trees had really curtailed the view. We have a view home, but I didn't really care much about it because I like shade. So I had planted a bunch of big cypress, and he said, you got to cut those down. He goes, you have a view house, and you need to sell it as a view house. That will command a premium. And I argued and argued, but finally I acquiesced, and I went and bought a chainsaw, and we chopped down those beautiful cypress trees and anything else that was blocking the view, and it opened the house way up. We also cut down a bunch of stuff that was close to the house that was curtailing the views out the windows, and also removed a bunch of furniture. And he just had all kinds of advice on how to make the house show better and show more upscale and more generic. And then we asked him about the real estate agent, and he said that yeah, we all know that agent, and of course we don't like him. He is the commodity, agent. He is just trying to get multiple listings, and he does nothing, and he collects his 1%, but there's no service there. But basically, my new agent was saying other agents avoid him, and they avoid his listings. And it turns out, because we sold our house now after 2 weeks on the market, but it turns out that he was being blackballed. He was being avoided. We were chasing away any potential buyers with the sign. And the other thing we learned is that there is value in a competent agent, and there is value in an agent that has connections. And the agent we picked, he built up expectations. We had it in pending status for a long time. It was on Facebook. We did have an open house this time. We had 25 families through on the day of the open house. About 8 showings in the first 2 weeks. And sure enough, we got an offer, and it was pretty near full price. We did drop the price, but we did so knowing that our house was not flying, off the market at the price we had set it at. So we were going to do a price reduction anyway. But the point of this story is, I was absolutely sure that real estate agents provide no value. I was absolutely sure that all they did was flap their gums and talk about all the stuff they were going to do for you. And in the end, it was the MLS that brought you a buyer, and the agent collected a big fat commission. And the bigger the house, the more expensive the house, the bigger the commission for doing nothing. And I could not have been more wrong, because this agent had connections. He managed the people that bought our house. Actually, he's selling their house for them. And we did not do a contingent sale. We talked them out of that. We did a pure sale, no contingencies, with a little longer escrow. But he knew so many people respected him, so many people came to the open house. We weren't chasing anyone away, and we weren't being ostracized because of a big ugly sign on the front porch that says, "We're really cheap and we hired the worst agent in town." So the moral of my story is, pick the right agent, and don't be afraid to pay them. Now, I will tell you, you don't know who this agent is, but you know what he did for us is he said that, I know that the commission is important to you, and he offered us 1.25%. And, we had bought from him before, so I guess maybe he thought he owed us one. He asked us, please buy through him on the next deal, because this is the kind of guy he is. he is planning the next relationship long before a transaction happens, and he's really, really well connected. You would say, so 1.25%. So we paid an extra 0.25%. We didn't pay 3%, as some people do, and we did offer, hopefully to buy through him when the time is right. Although we may just wind up renting for the short being. We may wind up doing some short sales, trying to buy through short sale, and rent in the meantime. So that's my story. Is a real estate agent worth the money? In my experience, it was. And I was very committed to going the cheap route, and was dead wrong. So anyway, food for thought if you're going to sell your house, no matter where it is. I think the real estate agent matters. Louis signing out. Thanks, everybody.